This should be information that underlines what we need to do to move this country forward. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's David Leis, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier, and a warm welcome to you on May the 28th, 2026. And speaking of warm, much of Western Canada is pretty warm. You may have noticed the temperature readouts in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and other parts of BC, where we've got a lot of temperatures into the 30-degree Celsius range. So I hope you're enjoying that summer weather as we see life coming on board and growing and flourishing right across the prairies. And good day, everyone, including Prairie. We're so glad that you can join us. It's always delightful to see not only our regulars, but also people who are joining us for the first time. And if you are, again, welcome to us. We talk about important issues here on the Frontier. We look at them mostly from a policy point of perspective, like a principled perspective in terms of, well, what are those decisions in the public realm that can best serve Canadians? What is the truth? What is the evidence that supports this? Well, supporting our traditions of free and open markets and a respect for the individual rights and freedoms of Canadians. So on that note, we're going to talk about a very important issue today again, and that is kind of an update about the state of the sovereignty movement in Alberta and other parts of the country, as we hear a lot about referendums. And so it's kind of confusing for many. But what are the issues? What are the policy issues that are driving this sovereignty movement? And as we hear a lot of messaging from various leaders that relate to both, fear, concerns, aspirations about what this country should be about, or what are the aspirations for Albertans as we look at this? So what are the real issues that this is about, and what are, frankly, the next steps? What are the solutions that we anticipate? And I've got the A team together on the show. We're going to talk about what are the real reasons why so many Albertans want to separate. What is the background to not only that sovereignty movement, but the unique mechanisms through citizen referendum that is being used? It's an interesting tool. So we want to pause about that and understand that better, because much of the country doesn't use those kinds of referendums. Some do, but many don't. We want to talk about the recent judge's decision and talk then about kind of the reset on referendums that's going on. Where are we at currently and what is next? So we've got a lot to cover, and we want to appreciate your comments. Keep them coming on. And Prairie says Ottawa is the issue. I just noticed that that came up here in the sign. But Carol Wallace says, great guest, great show, very informative, Pennsylvania watching. So thank you, Carol. Love that you discuss such real issues and challenges with ideas to improve our government. And that is from Elle. Thank you. You sure get a different outlook on the whole situation when you hear the whole story, not just what the media wants to show. Enjoy your video. And that's from Arlen Boyer. Thank you. And well said. And I think that relates to an interview that was just released this past Tuesday in my discussion with former BC Finance Minister Mike DeYoung. And Mike certainly had a lot of policy principles that guide him. And that is all very apropos to the challenges that we face in this country in 2026. So in terms of some headlines, I'd like to dive through a couple. One is it's just interesting that the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board holds shares in the Chinese social media app called WeChat. And that's interesting because that has been a tool to intimidate various parties, including various conservatives in the Canadian election, which is really kind of absurd. So the platform has been used to distribute all kinds of information, and the RCMP has credibly intercepted that. So this is not hearsay, but this is known fact. So that is a curious story that was found in Blacklock's Reporter this week. On other news from Blacklock's, it's interesting, there's some Indigenous leaders who want to be formally consulted on all new foreign treaties. The Assembly of First Nations has told the Canadian Senate this point. What do you think about that? Do you think that First Nations should actually all be involved in even foreign treaties like any other nation? It's also interesting that there was a study that just came out through the CRTC data confirming a sharp generational divide between Canadians over 55 who rely on TV news broadcasts on cable television versus the internet. And so this divide is something that we probably all are familiar with, but this report confirmed that. And that was a government study, and that was released through Blacklock's Reporter. And then in other news, we have a story related to, I believe, it's a rejection of a property rights motion that was tabled in the House of Commons just this week. And the rejection was 199 votes to 139. And that was a rejection of a Conservative motion to sustain property rights after a judge granted Indigenous title to some 1,846 acres near Richmond, BC. Actually, I believe that could be a typo. I believe it was 846 acres, if memory serves me correctly. But that is a very significant decision. It's known as the so-called Cowichan decision, which has created enormous uncertainty regarding property rights, not only in that province, but other parts of the country, as there are so many other similar claims on the books there. And then in other news, we have an interesting revelation through Blacklocks as well, through government documents, regarding the whole issue of buying Canadian. We know that many people want to buy Canadian, but the question is, what does it mean to be a Canadian company when there appears to be a number of cases where foreign-owned corporations have storefront operations in Canada, but couldn't say if a company was hiring temporary foreign workers would qualify. So it's an interesting story there. In other news, we also have concerns that a summer jobs program is about to come into place this summer, but there seems to be no accountability regarding whether or not they're creating how many jobs. So this was confirmed through an analysis, the first ever analysis collected as to whether or not how many jobs were actually being created. Imagine that. So at Frontier, we obviously promote principles like transparency and accountability. I think this is a great case study where there doesn't seem to be accountability. Other news this week is a MP well known to many Canadians. Mr. Guilbeault has announced his exit from politics. He has said that he plans to pursue climate fights in different ways, and that's to quote a story from the Globe and Mail. It's also interesting to ask the question, what legacy has Mr. Guilbeault left for Canadians and whether that continues on? And other news, the Bank of Canada admits that immigration has been a major factor in record youth unemployment in this country. And the bank further noted that this magnitude and rise in youth unemployment could be attributed to the country's rapidly changing demographics and is of real concern to our nation's productivity. And finally, I want to notice a indication of some deal is in the works to sign a supply of liquefied natural gas to Germany, and we'll see whether this actually happens. I believe the intention or agreement is to have this happen sometime in the 2030s. So it's quite a distance off, but every bit helps, I suppose. But in any case, that's some of the headlines we have. So I want to dive right into the topic of the day. And I'm very appreciative that we have two extraordinary guests. So one is a regular, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, who's our Vice President, of course, Research here. And a warm welcome to you, Marco.
Thank you, David.
And we also have, of course, Cory Morgan. And Cory's a good friend. He's you'll recognize him at the Western Standard. And of course, he's an author. So a warm welcome to you, Cory.
An honor to join you guys.
Well, great to see you, Cory and Marco. We're going to dive into it. And, you know, I'm finding this very interesting. I want to share with you, gentlemen, a fascinating poll that was a straw poll, mind you, as a result of this topic. And we wanted to just share with you this topic about over 1,000 people participated. The question was, is Alberta's separation movement falling apart? And 10% said yes, 78% said no, 12% said, I don't know. So one of the first questions I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, has to do with the separation movement. I mean, there's been an awful lot of work gone into this whole issue, but I want to do a kind of a mind exercise with you, a thought experiment, if you will. And that has to do with Confederation. We all know that Confederation came together formally in 1867 when a number of British colonies came together. And with the facilitation and leadership of many people, including Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada was created. And later, in 1905, Alberta joined Confederation as well. So my question is, given what we know now in 2026, would Alberta likely have joined Canada today? I'm just curious what your thoughts are and why they would join us or not. Marco, do you want to go first?
Sure. I very much doubt it. If we take into consideration, for example, the fact that our founding father, Frederick Haltain, who was the premier of the territories that became Alberta and Saskatchewan in 1905, had some serious reservations about what eventually became the entry of Alberta and Saskatchewan into the Federation, largely because, of course, the federal government retained the rights over the natural resources. So even what I'm trying to say is that even at the beginning, there was reticence, and this is part of the long list of infelicities that Alberta has been visited upon. But the actual answer to the question as of today is that no, we wouldn't, because Alberta is in many ways underrepresented, overtaxed, overburdened by regulations, and disrespected in so many ways, not only constitutionally. When you consider, for example, that the centralizing tendency in Ottawa has basically run over so many different jurisdictions in the province, social, economic, political, in all different sorts, but also the imposition of policies such as environmental policies and such things, which the whole point of having a federation and a distinction of jurisdictions is to allow for distinctiveness of policies and of political action in different parts of the country. So knowing what we know today, and if that was the setup of today, I very much doubt that the leadership of a province like Alberta today would accept those conditions to enter into a federation.
Okay, so there you have it from Marco Navarro-Genie. Is that if we knew what we know now, probably Alberta in its day would not have joined. Interesting response. Thank you, Marco. What about you, Cory? What's your response?
Yeah, well, just kind of framing the premise a little more too, because Alberta wasn't an existing unit that joined the Federation. It was sort of a unit that was created by the Federation.
Indeed.
So there was never a negotiating process to bring us in. It wasn't like Newfoundland later on that voted to join, and then of course there were conditions and discussion back and forth. It was sort of as Marco said, through the government and Haltain just saying, well, this is going to be these entities, Alberta and Saskatchewan, and these are going to be the rules. I think if it was an existing state of some sort and citizens were asked, do we want to do this, and they had some sort of representation to negotiate, no, I don't think they would have agreed to the deal offered. They'd look at Senate representation. I mean, the United States realized they had to balance, long before us, population versus, the regional representation, and our Senate wouldn't be acceptable to any thinking person coming into a system like that, or the lack of representation in that front. There were already problems in 1905 with farmers trying to get implements because they were paying tariffs to force them to buy Central Canadian farm implements, and then they were forced to sell their product on Canadian rail lines back to Eastern Canada. So it was already sort of a rough deal. I think Alberta might have joined at the time in that hypothetical situation if it was negotiated, because they would have found better terms and talked about some of these things. But instead, it was more of a federation that was imposed on the province rather than joining. So it left us with a lot of disadvantages that we are unfortunately experiencing today because of that.
Okay, so that's very helpful background that helps explain, well, where we're at today in terms of a sovereignty movement that advocates for finding that sovereignty outside of Canada, outside of Confederation. So I mean, what I'm fascinated by as well is that when I talk anecdotally with so many other Canadians, and I think this comes out in different polls, is kind of a puzzlement as to why Alberta would dare think about leaving Canada. I mean, Canada, is such a great country, and yet there's a perception that somehow this is personal. This is all about, well, just feelings, and somehow people feel miffed. Like, gosh, us Canadians, we're good people, so why would anyone dare leave our family of Confederation? And I kind of say that, half tongue in cheek, but I'm trying to listen carefully to all Canadians involved in this, including Albertans. And I think it would do well to try to understand the rational reasons that really have fueled this issue. And it's interesting. I see in the comments here kind of a reflection of that. If we go up to, there's a comment referring to Alberta being used consistently by so many parties. Sorry, we're getting so many comments in here, I can't necessarily see them all. But it says, Madam Producer, there's a column, a comment that Alberta has been treated like a prostitute by the federal den of thieves in Ottawa, stealing your family's future. Alberta wants freedom. So there's different acronyms here, but the point is that we have a lot of heartfelt emotion and feeling like Alberta has been ripped off. And I think that's been alluded to. So is this just all personal stuff where it's all about feelings, or what are the rational reasons? Help us explain that. Like, Cory, you mentioned an interesting reference there to money being exchanged. Can you give us rational reasons what's fueling this movement?
Well, there's a couple, and then the economic case is very clear. I mean, as mentioned, equalization. A lot of money is getting transferred to other provinces. Alberta never receives that. We get a reduced amount of transfers or services.
Just hold on for a sec. What do you mean by equalization? Let's break it down here. It's a lot of money being transferred out of Alberta to the rest of Canada. Is that it?
Yes, and
it sounds like a good idea. Don't we want to help each other out? We're carrying provinces. What's the problem with that? You guys are just greedy, Cory.
It could be. I should just define the equalization a little better anyways, because I know people get corrected all the time. Alberta doesn't cut a check for equalization that goes out. But we look at Canada as one big collective pot from all the federal taxes collected. The federal government sits on it and says, okay, we're going to dole it out province to province through different programs, different transfers, different services. Alberta tends to get shortchanged on just about all of them. But the most egregious of all is equalization, whereas everybody's supposed to sort of have the same amount of resources or ability, and they give a disproportionately high amount to maritime provinces, Quebec, which really does frustrate a lot of people because it has a very strong economy, whereas Alberta hasn't. I believe in the first couple of years of the program in the 60s, it received some millions of dollars, but now we're talking about cumulatively hundreds of billions of dollars that other provinces have been the recipient of. Alberta hasn't gotten any. And when we look at our economy, has had some downsides. We've had $10 oil. We've had negative price oil. Mm-hmm. We still never qualify for equalization somehow, no matter how hard things get here. The other part, though, is cultural and social. And I don't think Albertans get credit for the fact that we are a unique and distinct culture within Canada. I mean, it's not as simple to define as Quebec with a language, but Alberta definitely has more of an individualist outlook, very much of a freedom-minded outlook. And that was very much challenged during the COVID years, more so than usual, or even with general, I guess, things you could call, such as, woke policies that people view as such. And they feel that activist judges or liberal governments sort of impose it on Alberta. We don't have any defenses against that. So those, I think, are some of the roots of the issue, especially when we see our rising cost of living. We see the American GDP per capita continue to rise dramatically while Canada's remains flatlined. And we know we're sitting on so much resources that we really should be the wealthiest jurisdiction on earth.
Okay, that's a great summary. Marco, how would you respond to the question? What are the rational reasons that are really driving this sovereignty movement?
There are many. The structures of the Federation are essentially, from the point of view of Alberta, rigged against the West, and particularly in some respects for Alberta. One example is the example that Cory gave earlier about the Senate, for example. So Alberta has 6 members in the Senate, and sends loads of money down to the other end of the country. There is a serious imbalance in the fact that the people who receive money have a greater representation in some of the central institutions than the people whose money is commanded. So, for example, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick each have 10 senators in the Senate versus 6 to Alberta. If you put together the entire Atlantic region, they have 30 seats with the 6 that include Newfoundland.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Marco? Because I find that hard to believe that there's such an imbalance. I mean, I'm obviously familiar with these representations, but that's actually quite a stunning figure.
Yeah, so 10 to New Brunswick, 10 to Nova Scotia, 4 to PEI, and 6 to Newfoundland. That is 30 seats for the Atlantic region. With a more or less equivalent population to Alberta, all 4 of them. And Alberta has 6. But the imbalance is also regional in the sense that the 4 western provinces, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, have 24 seats in the Senate.
Right.
24 versus the 30 of Atlantic Canada.
So why has that never been changed? I don't understand why Albertans would put up with that for so long.
We've tried not to. We've tried to change this during the round of negotiations for the 82 Constitution, during the Mitch Lake round of negotiations, during the what's the other one? The Mitch Lake and I forget.
Charlottetown?
Charlottetown, excuse me. Yes, thank you. And going back to the Victoria formula, all these things have been tried to be corrected. And this speaks to the core of the question that a lot of these structural problems have been tried to fix and there is no fixing. So enter the 90s movement, right? You remember the Reform Party's motto, which came out of sort of the Western Standard in its original form, was the West wants in. And the West did go in, right? We put Prime Minister Harper, the country put Prime Minister Harper, a Westerner and a Calgarian of sorts, in office, thinking that this was going to fix things. And the reality is that they tinker around the problems with some policies, but the structural problems remain. And even when we send Westerners to Ottawa, the Westerners, once they are in Ottawa, they are compelled to try to please the population of the center in order to keep in power, and then ignore the demands or the requests from the West. So those are structural problems that are not going to change. And so from the point of view of people who want Alberta to separate, they point fingers and say, we tried the reform avenue and it did not work. So the only avenue left, they say, is simply to pull out and establish a brand new political entity.
Okay. So, Cory, would you agree with Marco's analysis? And he emphasizes that there are deep structural issues that have existed for years. And despite some efforts to try to change them, they just have never changed. And it seems like, and by the way, you're getting some thank yous from Sheridan there to you, Marco. But it's like Ottawa doesn't listen to these concerns. They don't really seem to see what's kind of in plain sight is a representation problem. Money flows go in one way. There's a whole host of cultural issues, to sum it up succinctly. And in Ottawa, they seem to be tone deaf. Instead, they throw it back and talk about language of fear and otherwise. But these are deeply held structural problems. Would you agree with that kind of analysis, Cory?
Oh yeah, and Marco laid it out excellently, because I think Albertans really wanted to try and work within and fix the system first, as you said, with the constitutional talks in the early 80s, Meech Lake, Charlottetown later, those failed. Reform Party was an effort to be able to come in. They talked about triple E Senate, which would have been equal elected effective. That got rejected. the path that Albertans have come to now and supporting independence was a long and winding one to get to where it's spiking now. And it's with Ottawa ignoring it and not paying attention. I try to remind people is not even take it personally. It's a matter of the structure and the system. I think there's probably a lot of very sympathetic members of Parliament, even in Central Canada and Eastern Canada. But if you want to win power and maintain power in this province or in this country, you have to cater to the center. It's not a matter of good or bad. It's a matter of math. So being nice to Alberta doesn't serve well to win your seat in Central Canada. That adversarial setup actually benefits the party in power. As long as you're winning Quebec and Ontario and is sprinkling through the Maritimes, you've won this country. So that it's that sense of irrelevance that frustrates Albertans, and it's that political structural reality that prevents Ottawa from being responsive to it, even if some people might even want to be over there.
Okay, so this is where I think this is a very important insight of our discussion today. I don't sense any of this as, quote, personal or somehow superficial. There's very real reasons, structural reasons that you both outlined that are driving this kind of sovereignty movement. And the question is whether we as a country, as a federation, can in fact respond to that and grow up. Now, I think there's another side to this. And by the way, there's a number of comments here I do want to mention. Constitutional change will not happen. Reform is designed to be impossible. So that's a very interesting point there. The other one is the oppressive control goes beyond Ottawa. Canada is a colony of the British Empire. The City of London dictates what happens in Canada. So that's again, a larger question, to what extent Alberta is being treated in effect as a colony among other parts of the country. But the center, the so-called center, is Ottawa in our confederation. And it seems like they just are not able to not only listen to this, it's kind of beyond their realm of possibility because the system is structured to really weight certain regions in a way that is not equal at all. And you can see those numbers that Marco just outlined in the Senate. You even look at the average size population of a member of Parliament's riding is remarkably different. Like in PEI, I think the average size of a constituency, and if memory serves me correctly, is about 30,000, whereas in other parts of the country, it's well over 100,000. So how do you justify that over time? So I think that's the quandary that we're in right now. So it's interesting. Denver Hodge says Canada is a dual class share corporation with Alberta having class B shares and no board to appeal to for managerial malfeasance. Wow, what a powerful analogy. What do you think about that, Marco and Cory?
Yeah, it certainly rings true that there is an imbalance that way, and that we can appeal to Supreme Court, but there is another institution, by the way, that is sort of imbalanced, right? By law, by constitutional law, there has to be 3 members of the Supreme Court that are from Quebec, and the choices for the judges tend to be rather ideological in some respects. One of the questions in the Alberta referendum coming up in October is designed to seek greater input from Alberta, or at least a similar input that Quebec has in order to put Supreme Court judges. So the imbalance is in several different institutions, in the Senate, in the House of Commons, in the Supreme Court. The last 3 governors general have been Quebecers, for example, which is rather very, very unusual. So it's a system that is not working very well for some parts of the country. It's working great for Quebec, but this is where the personal issue comes from, right? It's not personal, and yet it is, because when a certain number, a significant number of Albertans say that they want to look at this and maybe bug out of this sort of abusive relationship, that's where you see the personal issues, right? the prime minister dismisses it as a dangerous bluff, for example. That's pretty condescending if you think about it. What he's simply saying is that people who believe that Alberta should become an independent state don't actually believe it. It's just they're just bluffing. They're just playing games. The leader of the opposition in this province refers to it as separatist garbage. I mean, you talk about being personal, or of course he says that they're MAGA individuals, and the sound rhymes to a little squirmy animal.
Right. So you call people names instead of
Yeah,
listening to their issues. You call them names.
and that's where
Yeah.
the personal issues come from, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at the personal issues, it's not that they all come one way, but of lately they seem to be coming from out of a certain amount of abusive disrespect for Alberta's
Okay.
position.
There's good comments. So there's a lot of comments as well from the audience. Cory is absolutely correct. The system won't change because the Canada that benefits won't allow it to change. It's time for Albertans to change it, and that will come with independence. And that's from Drew Mitchell. Thank you. So on that note, I want to get to your comment, Marco and Cory alluded to both equalization and how Quebec likes the existing system in some measure. Obviously, they've been very good negotiators, a working confederation. And let's use the example of equalization. The formula is incredibly complex, but I do know that that does not include hydrogeneration, but the formula does include energy generation in the form of, what is it again? Oh yeah, oil and gas. So the equalization formula then is set up in such a way that for some reason, Quebec ends up getting some $14 billion approximately for equalization payments, which is obviously a significant amount of money. So it begs in some people's analysis that the equalization payment formula is rigged. It's not fair. Why would any rational province agree to such a silly equalization formula? Isn't that the example that you're referring to be clear, Marco and Cory?
Well, no province, in the West ever did agree to that formula. That's the issue, and that's the problem. It is a formula that's something to point out some of the frustration in the West as well. Equalization is constitutionally entrenched, but the formula can be adjusted and changed. It could have been made more fair or adapted. And while Stephen Harper was in power with a majority, they did actually, entrench the current formula, but it didn't favor Alberta at all. That's what I get back to. Whereas the political reality, the reason that Stephen Harper and Jason Kenney, both of whom were heavy critics of equalization before forming government, the reason they didn't change that inequity was that they knew it would be political suicide in central Canada, which leaves Alberta stuck in that mess. So this province and Saskatchewan has not been a recipient of it for a long time either. Our opinion doesn't matter because we don't have that political weight. They can afford to alienate us. They can't afford to alienate Quebec and Ontario. And it's an ever increasing trap because those provinces are becoming more dependent on that equalization, which will make it even more difficult, well, if not impossible for any future leaders, even if they have the will to try and change it. It would be the last thing they did while they were in office.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's very interesting. So I want to turn now to referendums. I want to ask the question, it's been said, poll after poll seems to indicate some 30%, perhaps it's more, of Albertans are advocating for sovereignty outside of Alberta. Help us understand where the public is at on this, and how did we get to the point where a judge said no to the ability of Albertans not to even answer a clear question with clear results? Marco, do you want to just bring us up to speed on how we got to where we are at now?
Yeah, I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau was very fond of talking about root causes until whatever the root causes didn't favor his own views and his own preferences. The issues here in Alberta are long and deep. I think we've sort of established that. But the last 10 years, excuse me, reawakened many and deepened a lot of them because of federal policies. So I don't want to say, and it's not what I'm saying, that the federal government is the cause of Alberta separation.
Hmm.
But they have certainly poked that bear and enraged it. The Alberta separatist and autonomist, I would like to call it in some respects, is homegrown. And and it goes back to before the founding of the province, when Alberta sought powers that other provinces had. In
Hmm.
other words, a desire to be equal and a desire to be treated in the same way as other provinces. If you look at the four of the 9 of the 10 questions in the October referendum coming up, do exactly that. They seek to establish a certain amount of strength in the authority of the Alberta government in certain jurisdictions, such as immigration, the appointment of judges, etc. And none of these things come out of the galaxy. Many of them are already being implemented, in fact, most of them, by the government of Quebec and in the relationship between Quebec and Alberta. So the origins of these things are well established in that
Hmm.
sense. There is an enormous number of Albertans who want Alberta to become stronger in the federation and more autonomous.
Hmm.
And I would say that within that autonomy movement, there is a subset of Albertans who have given up and say, this is never going to happen, right?
Hmm.
So going back to what we mentioned earlier, but the bottom line is that this is not about pipelines anymore. This is not about policies anymore. We could build 10 pipelines tomorrow, and the Alberta separatist movement isn't going away. What Prime Minister Trudeau poked and reawakened is essentially the realization that for many Albertans, this thing is unfixable, and this thing will not, the abuses will not stop.
Okay, wow. So a lot of Albertans have had enough. They want to move on and create their own bright future as their own nation. Um, and then there's others who say, no, we need to stick with the Canadian Federation and try to do the best we can, renew it. Fair enough. But let's stick with this country. There's a lot to offer, and let's carry on. Is that your take too, Cory? Where are we at?
That's about where it's sitting. And I think a lot more have come to that conclusion that, you know what, we just want out and give us the opportunity, let us have that question. I don't believe it's at a tipping point of over 50%, or probably not even quite close. But if we're looking at, consistent polls showing it in that 30% realm, that's pretty significant when you're getting around 1 in 3 people in a province that said, you know what, I'm ready for the final option of removing ourselves through a referendum. There's a lot of, I guess, to be speculated on as to how the mess we've gotten into and how it came to this with all the things that Premier Smith has proposed in the referenda. With those other questions, as Marco was stating, there are a lot of things that Quebec is already asserting itself very effectively within the Federation with the rules that they're existing. But some of the things Premier Smith's proposing also, we're just going to run afoul of having to change the Constitution. I mean, the Senate reform, realistic, provincial input on judicial appointments, things like that. They are constitutionally entrenched, but somebody could see it as well. Here's a list of the things that perhaps could quell the independent sentiment, and people can vote their way down that list. And the final vote is, and here's the people who are just saying, if we don't get that, or the ones who feel we're just not going to get that, we're voting to move on forward with a full-on independence referenda down the road. So this could almost be a progressive ballot working towards that. And it's putting Canada on notice, saying we want to see some substantive change. I mean, I'm of the mind of I don't believe it's going to come, but a lot of people maintain optimism. But people really need to see something solid. No more talk, no more discussions, no more promises. Change something. Change something.
So if you had the top 4 recommendations, Cory, and you were, to paraphrase the song, if you were king for one day, what would you do? What would be the top 4 recommendations? And I'll turn to Marco.
Certainly. Number 1, all the way back to the Reform Party, Triple E Senate, equal, elected, and effective. And I mean, I think if you get the first 2, you'll get the third one anyways, because they're accountable to the electors, and you'll have the same amount per province, no matter what you do. Secondly,
and by the way, so that sounds like a great idea. a triple Senate. Let's get those people to work instead of just showing up and doing. I'm not quite sure what they do, but what I'm saying, yeah, it sounds like that would be a good move that you'd think every area of the country could agree to that. So that's a good one, the Senate. Next
I
one.
think it's potentially passable. As well, when we're talking the structures of power, and Marco talked about it, the judicial setup right now, the imbalance in the Supreme Court, because we have those different levels of government. And
Okay, how is it imbalanced? Help us understand that, Cory.
certainly, and Marco might correct me on the exact numbers. As he said, Quebec gets 3 seats on the Supreme Court. I believe the whole West gets 2, and there's 9 in total. So the other,
Yeah,
4?
Ontario has 3 and 1 for the Maritimes.
Yeah. So again, we've just got everything west of Ontario is a tiny minority on the Supreme Court. So if there's ever a very large question that comes before Canada, it'll have to go before that court. And if there's regional bias, the West is going to lose every time.
Yeah.
The House of Commons is rep by Pop. I know there's issues in the Maritimes that, PEI would be pretty strangled if they had to abide by the same. So there could be room to wiggle on that. Some of the other things, equalization. Right off the bat, that's got to go if you're looking for the West to feel sovereign. And having the government exercise its existing constitutional authority. I don't know if I can get right up to 5, but these are some big ones. And one of the things is Prime Minister Carney and Justin Trudeau have sort of given de facto veto authority to provincial leaders, ironically, which is part of what disempowers Alberta. So when he implies that we need David Eby's approval to get a pipeline to the coast, or we need the province of Quebec's premier to get a pipeline east, or if we need Indigenous consent to get any of these things done, actually none of that is true. The federal government is the one that has the authority to say, hey, look, these projects are going to happen. They're going to go through. I mean, you want to negotiate them. You want to be respectful. You want to, mitigate impact on regions. But in the end, it's in the federal government's lap to say, we're a federation. This is the central authority that says you can't block that infrastructure from other provinces from coming across your place. And they won't do that. If they started doing that, I know it would stir up BC and it would stir up Quebec, but it would certainly cool Alberta down quite a bit.
Okay. So just to recap, Cory Morgan's top 5 list, and they sound like a good one, is a Senate issues, the having that equal and elected and representation, the so-called Triple E model. You also mentioned about House of Commons representation on population by and large, also about judicial appointments, make it equal across the country. And fourthly, you've also mentioned about changing equalization, sounds like a plan. And then finally, let's stick to the Constitution and have the federal government do its job and not interfere with provincial jurisdiction time and time and time and time again. And just as an example there, maybe the federal government should do its job, like do national defense well, and actually do interprovincial free trade. Wouldn't that be amazing? That would bring us up at least 5 to 7 points on our GDP. Wouldn't that be amazing? So we could all stand together as a unified country if the federal government just did its job and got these things in order. Sounds like a plan, doesn't it, Marco?
It sure does. It sure does. My list varies slightly from Cory's. I agree on Senate reform. I think we should also we are in bad need of rebalancing the relationship between the executive and the House of Commons. The Prime Minister's office, the office of the Prime Minister, has been enormously centralized in power. It has acquired enormous power in the last 4 or 5 decades. And the remedy for that is counterintuitive. It comes out of an expert in constitutional affairs out of Queen's University named C.S. Franks, which recommended that we double the number of members of parliament. And by doubling the number of members of parliament, we dilute the power of the prime minister. And by diluting the power of the prime minister, then the House of Commons reasserts itself, and that we are in horrible need of reasserting the supremacy of the House of Commons over the rest of the institutions in this country.
Excellent point.
So that would be number one for me. Number two, let me channel Jean Chrétien here for a second, is to erase the Indian Act. and to seek to rebalance this federation and erase this idea that there are citizens plus, but that we are all citizens of the same state, and therefore, regardless of race or anything else, our votes and our influence should count the same. I would get rid of equalization, and I would substitute the equalization payments for the GST. So each of the provinces, for example, instead of receiving or sending money to Ottawa as a kind of GST, equalization balance, should keep their GST in-house. This would essentially erase the perverse incentive that certain provinces have not to grow their economy, but instead compress their economy so that they can receive more equalization. But if you depend on your own tax base, if you own that GST or PST, then you have the incentive to grow your economy and to improve and continue to improve your economy in order to raise more revenue. So it's more of an incentive to fix things. I would try to figure out a way to rebalance and respect the jurisdictional order of the country. The whole point of having a federation, and the Americans are the first model of the federation, was to temper the temptation for tyranny. There is a reason why the Americans have so many different governments, right? The most efficient thing would be just to have one and be done with it. But the reason for a federation is to temper tyranny. And I don't mean to say that the federal government is tyrannical, even though some people say that, and I think that's kind of overblown to some respect. But the reality is that in this country, just recently, two different provinces decided to blockade the economic growth and expansion of Alberta, and no one else did anything. Not a peep.
Now, what do you mean by blockade Alberta? Can you clarify that? What do you mean by that?
Both British Columbia and Quebec refused to allow for an expansion of infrastructure that would enable Alberta to grow its economy and expand its energy.
And the federal government egged them on.
And the federal government egged them on and encouraged them and did nothing about it. Yeah. But neither did the rest of the provinces. And that's my point.
You mean their silence was deafening?
Yes. Whereas in a federal system, the way that James Madison conceived it, for example, was that if one constitutional jurisdiction, excuse my English, went rogue, or was tyrannical, or was abusive, the rest would come and gang up against it and keep and check it. That did not happen here. And so that tells me that this federation is not quite working as a federation. And so there's needs, and I don't know exactly what the mechanisms are. We need to think about it more carefully, but we certainly need some rebalancing of those powers in order to make sure that if this federation is to continue to be a federation, that particular potential ceases to exist. Because today was Alberta, but tomorrow it could be Quebec, or it could be PEI, or it could be anyone else, right? And so it is in the historical interest of everyone to make sure that what happened to Alberta recently doesn't happen again, and it doesn't happen again to
that's well said, Marco. That's a great list. I think it's very complementary to Cory Morgan's list as well, in terms of things that need to be changed. So, we don't all have to ride down the boat together in terms of a separation movement, but we do need to renew this federation. So there's a kind of, that's the fundamental choice. Are we going to renew this federation? Is Ottawa going to be tone deaf, and so many others that don't understand? These are very basic requests in many respects to move not only the sense of confidence in our federation that it can actually work, but that it can actually economically serve every Canadian. So, great conversation. I did want to share with you an interesting clip from our friends at the Aristotle Foundation. There was a debate recently between the former Premier Jason Kenney and, of course, Keith Wilson, who's been one of these other leaders in the sovereignty movement in Alberta. And I wanted to share those clips with you because I think it's an interesting kind of part of the debate here that we need to be aware of.
There's a reason why we are one of the wealthiest jurisdictions in North America. It's because we know how to build, we know how to work towards the future, we know how to create alliances, we know how to be great Albertans and great Canadians at the same time. Let's lead, not leave.
Why is it that a province with people that work as hard as we do in Alberta, that contribute and send so much to Ottawa every year, why is it when we are blessed with the third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world that we can safely deliver around the world, and equally important to the largest customer in the world right across our border, when we send all that money to Ottawa, the role we have in Confederation, why is it that we're always having to fight for things? Why are we always having to go and beg? It makes no sense. I'm certain if a Martian came down and you explained what was going on here, he'd go, don't you have Line 9 that supplies most of the oil and gas to Ontario and Quebec? Yeah, and then the TMX to Vancouver. What are you doing? Why are you always on your knees begging? Why are you always in court?
Anyways, very interesting clips there. Any quick response, Cory and then Marco?
Yeah, just it was an interesting debate, and it was good to see them being very civil for the most part, because we see a lot of torqued rhetoric on social media. I thought though that Premier Kenney played, or former Premier Kenney played a lot on emotions and pointing to an unknown and using a lot of fear, whereas Keith put in a lot on the existing issues and problems that are going on. And I think it's kind of a balance. And when the unknown future still starts to look brighter than the contemporary future with staying within the Federation, with being stymied for infrastructure and attempts to get things done, more and more people are going to move to a yes vote. So people really got to start paying attention to this, because unless there's change, a lot of Albertans are going to hit their breaking point.
Marco?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Cory as well. I am glad that these debates are taking place, and it's great to see the civility of it. It is interesting that some of what is coming out, for example, of people like Jason and even the Prime Minister and whatnot, seem to be somewhat tone deaf to the actual core of the demands of Albertans, which is that we need to fix things. And so it is not enough to say, and this is sort of Jason's point, is that one possibility is worse than the other. And let's say that is true. For a single moment that leaving is worse than staying, it still does not spell out what needs to be done to fix things in a real country, properly functioning country. No one should be wanting to leave. We should all be wanting to stay and build and build and prosper. The fact that there is a sizable number of people who want to leave, and let's not forget that on the 5th of October, 2 weeks before the October referendum in Alberta, there is an election in Quebec, and that there is a real chance that the government will be formed by the Separatist Party. So there are at both ends of the country a significant number of people who want to leave. That is not, by any stretch of anyone's imagination, a sign of health.
Indeed. Good points. I do want to share this clip from the Prime Minister, his recent comment the other day, likening it to Brexit.
In these separation issues, it is often advanced that vote for this and it's a free option. Vote for this and we will strengthen our hand in a future negotiation. That is a very dangerous bluff. That is a very dangerous bluff. I saw firsthand what happened in the United Kingdom when the view was vote for this, it'll be soft, and then we'll negotiate, etc. And they ended up, and they're still 10 years later trying to undo what people didn't think they were voting for, but what they ended up having.
So there's a kind of a comment that hit the headlines. For me, it just reinforces the need to talk about the real issues and changes that are required that will, quite frankly, take the air out of the sails here, the wind out of the sails. Pardon me, I'm mixing up my metaphor. Out of this sovereignty movement, and I think we've outlined a kind of a roadmap of policy actions. So I want to talk about policy recommendations going forward here, and you can as I show this to you, I want to ask you for your response to the Prime Minister's statement. But let's just talk about solutions. Can Ottawa listen and respond to concerns, and then next steps on the referendum? So first of all, Marco and Cory, what are your responses to the Prime Minister's statement likening this as a dangerous gambit?
Our good friend Preston Manning used to say that there was something in the water in Ottawa, that our politicians in the West, as soon as they got to Ottawa, they started thinking in a different way. And that reminds me of this idea that is the federal government going to listen to what Albertans want and do something about it? I have some serious doubts looking at the things that the Prime Minister has said. Implying that Albertans are bluffing, like I said, is wrong. Implying that he knows better than all the voters in England, in the UK, who voted for Brexit, is kind of condescending, but it's also tone deaf. Mm-hmm. Right. A little while ago, he said that we're going to make sure that Alberta stays in Canada, and one of the ways we're going to do that is we're going to address the concerns of health workers, and he does not realize that in that proposal, he is essentially once again trampling over the constitutional jurisdictions mm-hmm. that have landed this problem where it is. And right. So what that tells me, David, is that there is a certain amount of tone deafness. Mm-hmm. The Prime Minister says he's Albertan. I'd like to believe that he is, but he does not understand the problems that face him.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Cory?
Yeah, well, just quickly to hit on it, for the fact that the Prime Minister even called it a bluff on the part of Albertans, you never would have seen a Prime Minister say that to Quebec before any referenda happening over there, and it demonstrates that dual standard and how Albertans just aren't taken seriously on the federal front. Prime mm-hmm. Minister, it is not a bluff, and being condescending and dismissing us mm-hmm. is only entrenching support for the independence cause. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not deflating it, because they're not asking what can we do. That's what they got to start asking. Yeah, and they aren't even beginning to ask that. They're mostly just saying you aren't mm-hmm. allowed to go. And that's not helping the issue. Well, it's helping the issue for independent supporters is what that's doing. Yeah. As far as that next step, it is a referendum coming. And sure, this one coming isn't binding, but it's giving a lot of frustrated people an opportunity to say they want to start moving down that road. Mm-hmm. And we've never really had that discussion like this in the West mm-hmm. yet. And if the tone keeps up like this, I got a feeling there's going to be a pretty surprising outcome this October. Indeed.
I do want to link an interesting set of issues here as it relates to energy and the federal government's stance on this. We know that for the last 11 years, and you can argue in some ways that war on oil and gas continues in this country, with the continuation of things like net zero and all kinds of other policies. I mean, I've noticed in the audience comments a number of calls that why doesn't the federal government get rid of Bill C-69, the tanker ban, all the rest, all those things signal to Alberta does not matter. And any energy producing province does not matter, including Saskatchewan. Now, I know there's a debate here. Well, is there really a change going on? There's these MOEs, there's these things that are signed, but has been no results. I mean, there's indications of selling energy to Germany. Hopefully that will come through in, 2035, if memory serves me correctly. I mean, these are things that are far off in the distant future. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has signed an executive order to move and tie up with the southern pipeline, like the bridge project, that would be pretty easy to implement. And this is further to a conversation that I had on last week's live with Chris Bloomer and Dan Mateague about will there ever be a pipeline in this country, where that was just all called out as being kind of a fantasy, that there's no private sector capital that will really invest in this kind of pipeline project as long as the federal government insists on having these decarbonization costs tied onto it. So is there any hope that you see here that the federal government is actually responding? Or is it just more of the same of, well, to put a lack of a better term, kabuki theater, where it's just theater, it's just optics? Are they really moving the ball forward in terms of results? Am I looking at this too cynically in terms of policy? Is the politics screwing this all up? and making this even more frustrating as Albertans just simply want to see change. Cory, do you want to look at that first?
Sure. Like if Prime Minister Carney was serious about this, it's in his hands to immediately show it. A stroke of a pen, he can drop the tanker ban. A stroke of a pen, he can repeal 69. Those two things alone, you would see some private proponents showing up saying, okay, now we're interested in looking at this because the resource prices are high enough. And Carney's not a foolish man. So he knows these are not just hindrances to a pipeline, they're deal breakers. And the fact that he refuses to lift them, yet while pretending to be open to allowing this to happen, the fact that we even have to negotiate this is absurd. So no, Albertans are getting more and more cynical and skeptical past a while ago. And unless we see dirt moving, I don't think people are ever going to believe that this pipeline is going to happen. And it's just a pipeline. This is symbolic of the bigger problem all around, but a pipeline alone won't be enough anyway.
Yeah. As important that is, I think that's true. It's a real metaphor for the larger set of issues we've talked about. Marco?
Trust, I think, is the key component here. The Prime Minister came over a year ago and said that we were going to do things faster than ever before. And a year later, not much has happened. If anything is going to happen, they say another year. In the meantime, RBC just came out and reminded us that $1 trillion of investment has left the country. Never mind the money that isn't coming. And so I wanted to believe that the Prime Minister was serious about fixing the things that needed fixing. But it seems that it's more of the same, that he wants to sort of contemplate the political wins before he makes any of the actual tough decisions that he needs to make. And if he starts contemplating the electoral wins, then Alberta loses again for the reasons that we have explained. And so I tend to agree with Cory that if things were going to happen, they should have happened already. They haven't. And so I am not hopeful that we're going to get what we need coming down anytime soon.
Okay. So as we wrap things up here, I want to talk about the next step in terms of the referendum. We've heard about the judge's decision. Help us explain exactly where we're at now relative to the judge's decision and Premier Danielle Smith's alternative in terms of referendum language as we look to the fall, Cory.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a mire into this unprecedented area. Quebec never had to go through a consultation process before they ran a referendum, but then again, the consultation clause hadn't really been read in until 2004, so this is new. I mean, there's disputing views as to whether or not, the petitioning process is out for now. It's gone into the courts. It's going to have to go through appeal to find out if people really are allowed to petition and invoke a referendum on this without having done adequate consultation, which nobody's really defined what adequate is yet. So that's kind of a mess.
And consultation with whom again?
With the Indigenous people, yes.
Indigenous leaders?
Yeah, and Premier Smith's found what she thinks might be a middle ground, starting out giving a little bit towards the pro-federalist side that had petitioned to have a question to say, to ask about nothing, to ask if you want to stay in Canada, not a negative. And then cross that with another question, kind of talking in a roundabout way. If not, do you want to start this process towards having a referenda that would be Clarity Act compliant and binding? So it's kind of a mushy mess, and at least it would have immunized it, I guess, from having the judges shut it down, because she believes, and some lawyers believe, if it's a binary question, it's still going to get shut down by an injunction over the consultation thing that now needs to be ironed out. And it's a question of whether or not, I guess, the independence movement, everybody wants to campaign for that other side in the shorter term and look at a longer game, or what happens with it. We're still kind of all digesting it out here to figure out what it all means.
Okay, so there's some uncertainty now regarding the referendum itself, but there's still a large set of teams that do want to push forward on it. Marco, what's your take on the current state of affairs and an update on this?
Well, excuse me, the state to which things are up in the air is kind of ironic because it is largely caused by a court and the demands of essentially a minority within a minority. And so this should be funny if it were comedy, but it is not. The judge has essentially invented or extended what was to begin with a judicial concoction. This thing about consultation. Section 35 of the Constitution says zero about consultation. It came about by essentially, as Cory suggested, read in by justices, and so now it's being expanded, but the expansion of which offers no limit. The limit is very clear, that the obligation to consult is placed upon the state. This was not anything driven by the state. It was a citizens-driven petition. And so if we don't put a stop to this, then this makes the separatist case even stronger, right? Because if you think about the fact that Justice Leonard considered that Elections Alberta is part of the Alberta government because it is a public institution, you could say the same about a hospital, by the way, or about a school or about a university. And so at what point is there a line in which we don't have to consult everything that we do with the Aboriginals? No disrespect to Aboriginal Canadians, but it is essentially creating a bubble in which we have a co-government. If everything that our government institutions need to be consulted with Aboriginals, then we are bogged down, and this country is going to be worse off than it is today.
Indeed. So, no, I think those are very good analytical points related to the judicial decision by Leonard, but also where this is ironically taking us down a policy path that most Canadians do not want to be co-managed with another level of government in some measure. And I think that headline was a very interesting one for that reason, is the call by the Federation of First Nations calling for consultation even on foreign agreements. So I think this is a case in point. So we've covered an awful lot today. So what would be the next event in this story about referendums and sovereignty from your vantage point, Cory? What's the thing that we need to keep our eyes and ears open to as citizens?
Well, we got to see actually if the independence movement can coalesce and start an actual campaign. Right now, there's actually some typical things, I guess, among conservative grassroots organizations. They're all kind of fighting with each other. They didn't anticipate that court decision. And while it looks like a referendum is set, there's actually been no indication on the ground of any formal campaign getting rolling. So I think if they can get that sort of stuff ironed out and do a kickoff, that'll set the tone for what is going to happen over this next 4 months, because we are going into a campaign, whether people realize or like it or not.
All right. Marco, any comment?
Yeah, this is nothing new. If you look at the early days of the Quebec separatist movement, it was a sort of hodgepodge collection of disparate small and larger groups, and no real leader emerged. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, that there is no single leadership. But yeah, I think that we should look at this as Albertans as an opportunity to air and debate all the possibilities. And even though the rest of Canada and Canadians do not get to vote on this, they should also start asking questions and debate among themselves and with their own communities and government. The question that Robert Bourassa posed after the failure of one of the constitutional rounds, what does Canada want? That is the question, not just what Alberta wants, but what does Canada want out of this?
Indeed. Well, we come up to the referendum vote on October 19, when part of the question will be, what does Canada want? And so certainly Albertans will be asked to vote. It will be fascinating to see the electoral turnouts. I know that from historical analysis that these votes are not to be underestimated. There's many people that they're called the so-called low propensity voter who don't vote in a lot of things, but for things like this that are seen as that extra important vote, they do come out. And that's been illustrated not only in Quebec, but also in Scotland, among so many other similar types of questions. So this is a historic time for our country. And I just encourage everyone to be well aware of what's going on. And that's the spirit that we had our conversation today, to update on these important questions. So I want to thank you, Marco Navarro-Genie, for joining me, along with Cory Morgan. This has been a very insightful conversation.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave.
And on that note, I want to wrap up today. I want to say thank you not only to our guests, but MCA Media, our producer Lorraine, and of course you, the audience. Thank you for joining us today. You've had a lot of questions, and be sure to catch us every week, the same week time on Thursdays at this hour, right across the country and beyond. And you can find us on our YouTube channel and Merit TV and Miracle. And you can also check out our website at the Frontier Center for Public Policy, and of course, YouTube and on X. So until next time, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great week.
Here at Frontier, we don't receive any government funding. We are nonpartisan, and we work for you. Find out more and support this important work by visiting fcpp.org today.